Hi, I'm Gunshi Gupta, and today I'll be presenting our work titled Can Active Sampling Reduce Causal Confusion in Offline Reinforcement Learning? This work was done at the Oatmeal Lab along with collaborators from the Toyota Research Institute. Causal confusion is a phenomena where a trained agent learns a policy reflecting spurious correlations in its training data. If the spurious correlations are dominant in the data, such a policy can appear to be optimal if we go by training metrics such as loss, but can catastrophically fail at deployment time when those spurious correlations fail to hold anymore. Let's consider an example from autonomous driving. Driving datasets are famously long-tailed, with most of the data being boring and only a small fraction containing interesting scenarios like sudden stops, turning, and so on. A deep learning model would be trained on this data to predict the expert driver's control commands, given visual information of the surrounding scene. One example of how a model may get causally confused when learning from this data is pedestrian crossings. In busy cities, most of the times pedestrian crossings have pedestrians on them, and while the experts stopped whenever they saw a person on the crossing, a model might as well just learn that it should always stop at pedestrian crossings regardless of whether a person is present or not. This is because this simpler strategy will still work 99% of the time on this data. Interestingly, causal confusion has been anecdotally reported by many prior works when training a model on large, scalably collected datasets. The solutions adopted in these works involve domain knowledge of the task. For example, in the case we discussed, a practitioner might rebalance the data such that images where pedestrian crossings occur without pedestrians are shown more often to the model to stop it from learning a shortcut solution. The success of these schemes suggests that it might be possible to recover less causally confused solutions if only we had access to an oracle sampling scheme that would let us discover and upsample interesting data points. In this work, we explored active sampling schemes and evaluate whether they can serve as the general oracle sampler we talked about. In prior work, the goal of active sampling has largely been to achieve improvements in convergence speed or to learn from noisy data and so on. However, we are interested to see if we can discover interesting data points that break spurious correlations in the data and show them more often to the model so that optimization is not ignored on them. We consider datasets where a large majority of data points can be explained by using particular spurious correlations for prediction, but a small number of samples exist in the data that cannot. If this were not true, the task would be underspecified. We study the offline reinforcement learning setup and choose conservative Q-learning as an instantiation of an offline reinforcement learning algorithm. Pessimistic algorithms like CQL are designed for exactly the kind of narrow data distributions that are most prone to causal confusion. Shown here is the CQL objective combining the standard TD error of deep Q learning with a conservative constraint penalizing few values of actions that are not seen in the data. The focus of our work is to experiment with the data sampling strategies without modifying the objective. Shown here is the standard CQL algorithm, and the steps added in blue are the only steps related to active sampling. We experiment with two kinds of acquisition functions for active sampling. The first are uncertainty-based acquisition functions, which look at that variance in estimates from a deep Q network ensemble, while the second are loss-based ones, which look at the temporal difference error of the deep Q network ensemble. Now we come to the experiments. We designed three setups to simulate causal confusion in offline reinforcement learning. We train RL experts on the unmodified version of these environments and then use them to collect offline data on the modified versions of these environments. We then trained models offline with CQL with different data sampling strategies on this data set and evaluate them on a set of environments testing different cases of causal confusion. First, we consider a grid world where an agent starts behind leading vehicles and needs to cross a traffic light to reach the goal on the bottom right. In our environment, the probability of the traffic light turning red becomes lower as the agent approaches it. Thus, the dataset contains only a couple of episodes where the light turns red with the agent at the front of the traffic queue. We introduce a spurious correlation, a flashing yellow tile at the top left of the grid. This emulates the brake lights on a leading vehicle in traffic, and it is yellow whenever the leading vehicle is blocked and gray otherwise. This agent could simply follow the tile as an indicator of whether to stop or go ahead, and the policy would be correct for 98% of the data points. In our results, we see that uniform sampling sees a visible degradation in its performance when it is trained with the yellow tile than without. We also see that active sampling variants trained with the yellow tile recovered the non-causally confused solution much quicker than random sampling. We now look at the goal navigation environment maze and curate a dataset such that 90% of the episodes have the goal at the top right location, and 10% of episodes have randomly sampled goals. We show the performance in two kinds of environments, those with fixed goals and those with randomly sampled goals. Like before, we see that the performance of active sampling variants is better than uniform sampling when goals are randomly sampled, and that all the agents do equally well in the fixed goals case. This is because even causally confused agents can navigate successfully, but they are causally confused about the location of the goal due to the imbalance in the data. Next, we look at the car racing game Enduro, where the action sequence of an optimal agent are highly correlated and thus predictable across time. We thus display the previous action taken by the expert agent on the input images shown to the CQL agent. We see a significant degradation in performance of uniform sampling because of this addition. We see that active sampling variants seem to recover significantly better models quicker, like before. We further show that the quality of uncertainty estimation affects the time it takes to recover a good solution. We train a large and a small Q network ensemble in parallel on identical data. We conduct two experiments with either of them selecting the data points to learn from for both the ensembles. Shown here are the plots, and we can see that the larger ensemble's uncertainty leads to quicker convergence to the highest reward achieved for both ensembles when compared to the smaller ensemble's uncertainty being used for sampling. To summarize, we designed setups to study causal confusion in offline reinforcement learning and proposed active sampling schemes to alleviate it. We confirmed that active sampling produced offline reinforcement learning agents that were significantly less causally confused than uniform sampling variants in fewer optimization steps. Thanks for listening, and please head over to our poster for more.